Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar, which is about a few simple hacks that you can use to improve your GRE score. A lot of the stuff that we're going to cover in today's webinar is going to be fairly basic, but it informs the basic approach that you should take to studying for the GRE. What happens is that people generally, put in effort, and it's not that people aren't, don't tend to work hard enough or, try to do as well as they can. But the nature of how they do their preparation tends to be flawed. And when that happens, it's very difficult to respond appropriately and get the kind of improvement that you want to see. So as a result, it's very important for you to start out by approaching your preparation the right way. So thinking about what to do on the test, thinking about what the test actually tests you on, thinking about what skills you need to develop and what approaches you need to take on a very baseline level. And this will inform your ability to take the test to the best of your actual ability, right? You will not really lose out on your potential. You'll not really lose out because you didn't approach the test in the right way. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that this webinar is going to be 60 minutes long. Um, it it goes on a little bit longer as the result of questions that is something that could be on the cards, though I don't anticipate that happening. Uh, let's cover a few ground rules for how to conduct this session in the best possible way. So, since there's about 20 or so of you, online in different places, uh, trying to connect with me, what we will be doing is that we'll be using the chat window for responses to things that I ask. If you would like to ask me a question yourself, you can ask the question in the Q&A tab. So if you hit Q&A, you can ask any question of your choice. There's I think that if you, on your end, there's this raise hand function. Please don't use the raise hand function. It's not really optimized for how we tend to conduct these webinars. So if you have something to say in general, put it on the chat. If you have a question specifically to ask, you can put it on the Q&A. Now, I see somebody saying hello on the Q&A, so hey. Now, I just want to test out one thing on the chat so that we can see that everything is working or not. If you can hear me clearly, please type 1. If you cannot hear me clearly, please type 2. All right, I see a bunch of ones coming in. So that indicates to me that most of you can hear me clearly and most of you are comfortable and familiar with using the chat function, right? So that's really what I wanted to establish. For those of you who have hit the raise hand button, if you have something to say, please put it on in the message in the chat so that I can answer you. If it is a question, you can always put it in the Q&A tab. So one last thing is that if you find that you're facing lag or you find that you're not able to hear me clearly, just put it on the chat window and I will test it out just like I did right now. And if, things really aren't working, then I will reset stuff from my end. But what is far more likely is that your internet may not be picking up the connection as soundly as it should. So if we do find that others can hear me fine, then probably it is something that you have to deal with from your end. I see that a question has come in. Okay, it's just somebody testing out the features. So how we will do this is that I will continue on the explanation and continue letting you know different tips and hacks that you can use. And if you have questions, you can type them in at various points, but I will not stop whenever I get a question. I will stop at certain intervals, and all of the questions that have built up until that point, I will read them out and hopefully get to as many of them as I can. All right. So you may be wondering who I am, right? Speaking to you right now. My name is Matu, and I have a master's degree in economics. So I have a bachelor's and master's in economics. And I did my master's from the University of Amsterdam. And in order to go there, I had to take the GRE. So I did take the GRE, and I used my score to help me get admitted here. Now, at a certain point, I thought I wanted to go to business school. So at a certain point, I took the CAT as well and tried a bunch of things out, but realized that what I really enjoy doing is teaching. Teaching is fun for me, and I enjoy standardized tests. What I like about them is that there's always an approach that you can take, that there's always a way to look at the exam, not just as, hey, this is an obstacle, let me brute force attack it, but a way to see it as a test where understanding the test is useful in helping you achieve it well. And I do believe that, you always should start out believing that you can beat it. You always have to start out believing that you have it within you to figure this way out. So that's something, that's a little bit about myself, right? And yeah. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about CrackVerbal as well, which is, we've been around for about 12, 13 years now, almost 13 years now. And we've coached over 5,000 students in that time. And we're present in a lot of countries around the world. Now, a big part of this is that we focus our approach to the test for students who aren't necessarily first language English students, right? So a lot of countries where people want to, a lot of countries where people intend to take the GRE in order to move to a first world country, but they themselves aren't first world speakers, they tend to prefer our approach. So it's a little bit about us. And here are a few resources to help you get started. So you can go on to online.crackverbal.com/GRE, and you can check out our online course. It's a pretty useful course, and it covers a lot of the content in a manner that is succinct and easy to manage. We also have, apologize for that. We also have a variety of ebooks. So gre.crackverbal.com, and in the free resources section, you'll see a bunch of ebooks, which are, just a few small approaches to how to take the exam, right? This is something that I cannot harp on enough, that approaching the exam with the right approach and attitude, approaching the exam with the right intent, approaching it with the right strategy is essential to ensure that the tactics that you employ will eventually work. We also have a number of free videos on YouTube, so you can go through them, and it's easy to get onto a YouTube playlist, and if you have autoplay on, it's something that you can just take in as it goes along. We also have flashcards, and these flashcards are a series of 500 different words in which we not only teach you what the word means, but we use it in a scenario where you can relate to it with a situational as well as a visual cue. So if you have a situational and a visual cue alongside the word, then you not only understand what the word means and remember it better, but you also have a sense of the situation where you would use it. You would also have a sense of where exactly this word might be useful to you if you were going to use it in your real life, or whether you are, if you are to see it, on the GRE as part of a question. So pretty useful, and we'll get into further detail about how this is a very useful resource. We also have some blogs because, at the end of the day, we find that a lot of students have a sense that they want to take the GRE because they've heard on some vague level that, hey, okay, if I take the GRE, I can do a master's, or the GRE is the next step for me to take. But it is also important concurrently to think about what you are going to do with the GRE. The GRE is an exam that essentially all it really does is it opens some doors. Now you need to know what those doors are. You need to know what doors have been opened for you so that you can choose which one is the most attractive for whatever your eventual goals out of life or eventual goals out of a master's program are. So to that end, gre.crackverbal.com, and you can go to our blog tab. All right. So that's enough of an introduction. Let's get to it. Let's get to, the 10 hacks that you're here for. All right. Now, the first thing that I want to address is essentially, the first two tips essentially to know yourself and to know the test. Now, what do I really mean by that? Let's try and address that. So, if you go to the polling tab, you will see that there are a number of questions. There's 3 questions on the polling tab. Uh, Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to answer questions 1 and 2. I don't want you to answer question 3 just yet. So please just answer questions 1 and 2. And I'm going to launch the poll, and I'd like you to answer the questions over the next minute or so. All right, so I'm going to launch the poll now. So you can go ahead and answer the questions number 1 and 2 for this poll. Uh, are you able to see the poll? Please hit 1 if you are, and 2 if you're not able to see the poll. Okay, I do see people indicating that they've seen the poll, and results are coming in. All right, fine, no worries, no worries. I think it just took a little while to find it, right? So fair enough. See that people have gone ahead and answered question 3 as well. That was not super necessary, but okay. I also see that 75% of people have voted in. It does seem to have slowed down right now. 79. If anyone votes in the next 10 seconds, I will pretty much call it. If not, I'll call it at 10 seconds. All right, okay. So we have 80% of the votes, and I think that's pretty much good enough. Now let's address question number 1 first. So 25 of you responded, and I see 26 of you responded now. All right, fair enough. And 22 of you said verbal, which is 85% of you, and 4 of you, which is just 15% of you, said quant. Now, this is pretty common, right? And this is understandably common because, English is not really our first language, right? So this is generally going to be the trend. Now, it's good that you know this because you now know that you specifically find the verbal section harder, or you specifically find the quant section harder. Right? If you went out of your way to answer this question, it means that you at least thought about it for a second and you were like, okay, fine, that's the challenge. That's what I got to overcome. That's going to be, for me, where I got to put my time, energy, and focus to get better, right? So if you know yourself well, you know which areas you can target what kinds of scores, right? For example, if you're targeting a 320, right? A 320 will get you into most universities. So let's say you're targeting a 320. You probably aren't going to target getting a 160 and a 160 simply because, well, for one, right, you aren't going to have similar levels of ability at verbal and quant. If you find that you are better at quant than at verbal, you'll want to get more than a 160 in quant so that you can give yourself a good shot at verbal, right? 2, it brings us to our second point, which is knowing the test, right? So you need to understand what the test comprises of so that you can take the test effectively and efficiently, right? Now, you need to make sure that you set yourself a target that is achievable, not just by your standards, right? By what you find easier and harder and what you find achievable, but also by what the test setup makes achievable and not. So for example, verbal scores tend to be lower than quant scores across the board. This is not just true for Indian test takers. This is true for test takers across the board. You know that if you have a score of 158 in the verbal section, it is at a similar percentile to if you had a 162 in quant. So 162 in quant is an equal performance to a 158 in verbal. Now that's interesting, right? That means that, you know, if you were looking to get a 320 and you were equally good at both sections, you'd be looking at a 162 and a 158. If on the other hand, you find that you are significantly better at quant, the split might be even greater. You might need an even better quant score. So understanding yourself and understanding what the test comprises of are both crucial elements to setting both realistic goals and charting out a plan towards getting to what is that realistic goal, right? You can, you know, you might not be at the level that you want to yet. You may certainly not be at a 320 plus level yet. However, if you are on your way there, you need to know, okay, well, if I am going to get 320, what am I going to get? What is it going to look like? What is achievable? And what should be my approach towards getting there? What areas do I need to focus on to get there? Right? So this is an understanding of the test on a level of, you know, what are realistic scores. And by the way, just to confirm something so that, you know, just so that we're on the same page, you can be scored in a section, right? Either the verbal or quant section, on a scale of 130 to 170. Generally, so that means that you can get a total of anywhere between 260 and 340. Generally, a score of 320 will get you into most universities around the world, and hardly any universities will ever reject you because your GRE score is too low. They may reject you for other reasons because they happen to be selective programs, but they may not reject you because of your score. Anyway, knowing these things about the test and knowing these things about yourself are crucial details towards gaining a sense of how to approach the test. Another example of this is I have below with me here a series of like bits of information about what the breakup of any given verbal section is. So in any given verbal section, you tend to have about 20 questions. But what is that breakup of 20 questions? That 20 questions happens to be about 8 to 10 questions of reading comprehension, about 5 to 6 questions of text completion, about 4 to 5 questions of sentence equivalence, and about 0 to maybe 1 or 2 questions on rare occasions of critical reasoning. These are the different kinds of questions that you can face on the GRE. So now you have a little bit of information about what the test will present to you, what the test can possibly throw at you on a question by question basis, right? The reading comprehension and the critical reasoning sections, as you can see, test you on your comprehension. So they test you on your ability to understand what you've just read, and they test your ability to reason and process that effectively. On the other hand, sentence correction and sentence equivalence and text completion both test you on your vocabulary, and they test your understanding of how that vocabulary plays out. What this means is that there are two areas of the test, two sort of clear, distinct areas. One which is reading comprehension and critical reasoning, one which is text completion and sentence equivalence. These are different types of questions that you can face, and knowing this helps you know that the test is basically split into two clear different areas. I'm going to stop now for a second because some questions have been asked. So I've said that a low score is acceptable. What does the university look for? So I've not really said that a low score is acceptable. In fact, I would hardly say that a low score is acceptable. A score of a 320 or above is a pretty high score in itself. A score of 320 and above puts you in the top 10% of GRE test takers at any given point in time. It is an extremely high score, and it is pretty challenging to get. Generally, at this point, no university would reject you on the premise of your score. No university would reject you with a 320 and suddenly accept you if you had a 330. You know, like that doesn't change the game so much. At that point, a university is looking at your application, they're looking at the essays that you've written, and they're looking at your overall profile and what you've done in your academic career up until now. I have somebody else ask another question. I'm going to take this question, and then any ones that come in after, I will pause at a later point to take the others. Somebody says that they scored a 164 in quant. And recently in the test, they scored 163 in quant. And they'd like to get a 169 to 70 in quant and a 325 in GRE. Okay, what is the extra mile of prep? Now we'll get into a little bit about that, but if you're looking for something very, very detailed, I will tell you that this is not necessarily the area to do it, simply because your understanding of a detailed study plan is something that is going to come out of your understanding, like I said, of yourself and what the test can throw at you. What I do want to draw your attention to, on the other hand, however, is one positive thing that you say that you would like to get as a 169 to 170 in quant and a 325 plus in the GRE. Now, that is a decent enough goal I would suggest to aim for. Uh, it is also a realistic goal in that if your quant is better than your verbal, you're looking at something like a 168, 169 in the quant, and something around a 156, 157 in the verbal to get to a 325. I think that would be a realistic expectation in your head of what would constitute a 325 plus score if somebody is better at quant than is verbal. So if you found that you're better at quant than at verbal, or that verbal is harder for you, think of that as a realistic target to get if your realistic target is 325 plus. Like that would be the kind of difference that you would expect to see between your scores, and that would be the targets that you would try to aim for. So I think that that's a good question that you asked, in that I can confirm to you that your approach is at least sound, and the baseline premise that you have in mind in terms of what you need to achieve for the test is very good. All right. The next thing that I would say about the test is this, right? It is absolutely essential that you game every mechanic. Now, let's take a look at question 2 and how you answered it. Now, I see that some people said that they would take, about 8 people, so 27% of you said that you would train nonstop to be the best fighter, to somehow take on Floyd Mayweather. You could somehow defeat him. You could somehow, beat this guy by training super, super hard. And you know what? I applaud your initiative, and I applaud your hustle, and I applaud you trying to, push your way into, trying to be the best that you can be. But at the end of the day, there are certain walls that you will not be necessarily able to overcome cleanly on the GRE. And with this in mind, the other approach, which was indicated, which says learn everything about how he fights, is a very, very sound approach that I also recommend you incorporate into your approach. Now, this does not mean do not study hard at all, do not try to be the best. If you have the time on hand, absolutely go for it, absolutely try to be the best version that you can be. However, what is going to be very effective is if you understand every single mechanic about how this person fights. If you know whether Floyd Mayweather is right-handed or left-handed, spoiler, he's left-handed, right? If you knew this, you'd know which side the punches are coming from. If you know whether he prefers to punch at the face or at the midriff, you know what to deal with, you know what to dodge, you know what to take on, right? If you know what he's weak at, you know where to fight him, you know where to hit him, you know what type of shot to hit him with, right? If you understand the mechanics of what you're up against, and the GRE is your opponent, your GRE is what you're up against. If you understand what the strengths and the weaknesses are of the GRE, if you understand the way the GRE is organized to try and catch you, you can take on the GRE and you can defeat every exploit the GRE presents to you. And therefore, you will actually be able to get the maximum possible score. This is what you can do to push yourself that extra mile. This is what you can do to push yourself to that point where you can get the score that you need to get, right? So let's take a look at this, right? The GRE is an extremely user-friendly test. But this user-friendliness is completely wasted. In fact, user-friendliness actually hurts you if you don't use it, if you don't milk it for all it's worth, if you don't use it to the full extent and effect that you can use it. You will not be able to get the most out of it, right? So for example, you have the section which is pictured over here, which is essentially this mark and review section. So it allows you at any point to review the test and see what questions you have answered and not answered. This student, for example, has not answered a few questions to start with and has not answered question number 16. In addition to this, the student has marked certain questions. And as you can see, you can mark a question if you have not answered it, and you can mark a question even if you have answered it. So you have a whole bunch of options. It allows you to skip a question and move ahead. Let's say you get a reading comprehension passage and you're just not feeling it. You can continue, you can skip ahead, do the other questions, build your confidence and stamina and control up, and come back to that GRE passage. Come back to it later when you're comfortable with it. So that's something you can do, but you need to know when to be able to do that effectively and when not to, right? It allows you to change the answers to questions that you've already answered. Some other tests don't let you do that. The GMAT, which is a very similar test but used primarily for business school, doesn't let you do that. Once you've answered a question, there's no looking back. The GRE lets you do this. If you have time within a section, you can change the answers that you already have answered. If you feel like you've answered something incorrectly, you can go back and fix it. That means that if they ask any questions that give you such an opportunity, you absolutely should go back and use it. Not going back and using it and not using it is criminal, right? That's what I mean when I say that you need to milk it for all it's worth. You need to take every little advantage you can get in every little place. You can change your answers. You can review what you've done. You can mark stuff, right? And in fact, something that I want to draw your attention to, especially because I didn't know this when I took the GRE myself. Answer every single question. Nothing is subtracted if you answer a question incorrectly. There's no negative marking. There's nothing that, there's no negative approach to not answering a question. If you don't answer a question and you answer a question wrong, it is treated exactly the same. So you might as well answer a question. I didn't know this and I didn't answer 2 questions. And that hurt me. I ended up getting a 336, which is a decent score. It's a good score. It, helped me for sure. But I could have maybe gotten more, right? But I didn't. And it is what it is. But essentially, right, you need to answer every question. So, this student's approach, which has a bunch which say not answered, I disagree with this approach. My view is this. If you're not sure how to answer a question, put down an answer anyway and mark it, because you can answer and mark a question as well. So answer every single question as you go along, but mark it. Later on, if you have time at the end of the section, you can go back to every question you've marked and see if you'd like to change your answer. Because at the very least, you've done some due diligence and you've answered the question to some extent, right? So that is something that you absolutely should do. You absolutely should put in the effort to marking questions and answering them as well, right? Please answer every single question. All right. Now, I want to draw your attention to the next the next question number 3, which, I see that you've already answered. So I'm not going to ask, give out separate time to answer it since you already have. If you, haven't, then go ahead and push it through right now if you want. But that is something that you should try to push in. All right. So I see that, this was a multiple response answer. By the way, the test, depending on the type of question that you have to encounter. I just got a notification saying that my connection was not stable. So if you can hear me, can you hit 1? If you cannot hear me, can you hit 2? I see somebody also said audio is back and everyone's answering 1. All right, so just to reiterate what I was saying, I gave you a question here where one question was multiple choice. I gave you another one where one was multiple response. I gave you multiple options, different ways to answer the third question. You will get different such types of questions on the GRE itself. Now I see that a lot of you have indicated that your concepts are the biggest problem to encounter. And to tackle your concepts effectively, you have to watch videos, you have to attend classes, you have to figure out the right approach to take on, right? You have to, acquaint yourself with the concepts by taking time out to study them separately. But I do see the other problems, aside from the very obvious set of, problems which is indicated to be the concepts. I see that a lot of you have indicated that vocab and time management are troubles. So these are things that we will address as we move along. So let's talk about managing our time effectively, right? And this brings us to tip number 4. So tip number 1 was know yourself. Tip number 2, know the test. Tip number 3, game every mechanic, find every hack, find every exploit. Tip number 4, you need to plan and execute a time management strategy. Now, I'm going to give you the example for the verbal section for 2 reasons. 1, I am one of the verbal faculty members here. even though incidentally, right, I am a verbal faculty, I like the verbal section, I like dealing with verbal questions, I'm most at home with verbal, but my quant score was 170 and my verbal score was 166. So I would still say that that makes me a better verbal person than a quant person. So I'm in a better position to explain elements of how to take on the verbal section with a 166 than somebody is with a 170. There are plenty of people who can get a 170. So given that I'm one of the verbal faculty members, and given that many of you have indicated that you find the verbal section significantly harder than the quant section, right? I see that, the poll ended up being 28 and 5, which is very extreme. I'm going to talk a little bit about the verbal section. What you ideally want to do is that, what you'll see is that you get multiple verbal sections. As you know, you could get 2 or 3. And in each one of them, you get half an hour for 20 questions, 30 minutes for 20 questions. What this, means to the person who is a little bit untrained or not thinking too hard about how to approach the test is that they tend to think, well, 30 minutes for 20 questions means 1.5 minutes per question, right? That means 90 seconds per question. I should teach myself to solve the questions in 90 seconds. But that's not exactly right, right? In order to finish the test effectively, you need to know what are the different types of questions at hand and how to take on those questions. What is going to be the challenge? Because every type of question is not the same. Sentence equivalence question. So what is a sentence equivalence question anyway? It is a single question which is 1 sentence long, and you're given 6 options with 2 blanks. With a single blank and 2 options out of those 6 that can fit the blank. It is simply a matter of vocabulary and understanding where that vocabulary would be used. They're extremely difficult questions in terms of vocabulary, but they're not very time consuming. To do a sentence equivalence question, you only have to read a sentence and think of which words would adequately fit that sentence. And that's that, right? It's that straightforward. On the other hand, to do a reading comprehension question takes a hell of a lot longer. To do a reading comprehension question, you not only have to read a passage, you have to answer the questions after reading the passage. That's a lot more to do. That's a lot more to figure out. That doesn't work exactly right. So what you'll find is that reading comprehension and critical reasoning actually take a little bit more time than sentence equivalence and text completion. And you should plan your time management as follows. Now, sentence equivalence and text completion, as we said, tended to make up about 1/2 of the test, right? We saw that 5 to 6 questions would happen for text completion and 4 to 5 questions for sentence equivalence. That makes up about 10 out of 20 questions. Now, half your test or 10 questions should take you about 10 minutes because these are the ones that you can do quicker. You need to do this quicker so that for reading comprehension and critical reasoning, you've given yourself more time and you therefore have 20 minutes to do 10 questions. You therefore have 2 minutes per question. You have time to read the passage as well as answer the questions. You have time to read the argument and process and analyze the argument as well as understand how to answer that argument effectively. It takes a little bit more time, but you need to create that time for yourself by answering sentence equivalence and text completion questions a whole lot quicker. And that is the right approach to take. All right, let's move on to question number 5. Right? Sorry, not question number 5, my bad, tip number 5. Now, you need to approach answering questions in a manner which involves eliminating answers that don't work. You have to approach your questions by eliminating answers, right? Remember this, especially true in the verbal section, but it also holds true in the quant section. The right answer is the right answer because the other answers are the wrong answers. The right answer is not the best answer in the world. If you have to choose what is the ideal word to fill a blank, the ideal word to fill a blank can be several different words. There is no set of 2 best answers or 1 best answer. There are multiple words that could be the best possible words or all adequately possible words to fill a blank. The right answer is correct not because it fills the blank correctly. The right answer is right because all of the other options did not fill in the blank correctly. So this is the way that the test has been set up. It is not that the right answer has been chosen because it is the best answer in the world. The right answer has been chosen because the other answers have been wrong. So it means that 4 wrong answers or more than that wrong answers have been chosen in order to give you You know, the wrong answers of the test give you the right answers of the test. So if you eliminate the wrong answers, you happen to be going the intended route that the GRE expects for you. If you eliminate answers, you make sure that you approach the test the way the people who set the test approach the test to begin with. And that way you end up reverse engineering the test in a much more effective manner, right? This happens to be true for the GRE, but you know what? It happens to be true for other standardized tests as well. For any test which is essentially entirely multiple choice or almost entirely multiple choice, the right approach to answering questions is always through the process of elimination, because the right answer is right because the other answers are wrong. Right? And there's some other reasons why you should eliminate answers rather than pick an answer, even if you're not convinced by that alone. As we discussed earlier, there is no negative marking. There's no penalty for guessing incorrectly. If there's no penalty for guessing incorrectly, what can we interpret about the game's mechanics? What can we interpret about the GRE's mechanics if we are to see it as a game that we want to take on? It means that we interpret it as expecting some degree of guessing from us. Because if guessing gives you some chance of answering the question, it means that they expect that you have some chance of answering the question even if you know nothing. Which means that they expect you to guess. Which means that not guessing is actually worse. Means that not guessing is actually going to hold you back. Guessing just brings you back on par. When we ask you to answer 20 different questions, to answer 20 questions in the verbal section, a good GRE verbal score, one of say 160 in the verbal section, involves answering about 14 questions right, which means answering 6 questions wrong. It probably means that you guessed the answers to about 8 questions and got 2 of them right. It probably means that. That means that there has been a degree of guessing. It means that you have guessed of nearly 40% of the questions. So what happens is that we feel reticent to guess because we feel like guessing is unethical, or guessing is flawed, guessing doesn't really work, or guessing is, this like cheap hack, that I don't really know, that guessing is the right way. I'm just blindly following it. No, but you are guessing with intelligence. You're not guessing blindly. You're guessing with some approach that has intelligence followed. If you have eliminated options, you're already guessing among fewer options. So a text completion question, for example, that has a single blank to it, gives you 5 options of which 1 answer is correct. If you have eliminated 2 options and you guess blindly, you have already given yourself a 1 in 3 chance. If you do that for 9 questions, you will get 3 of them right. So for questions that you don't know the answer to, which will come up from time to time, I could say for sure that I didn't know the answers to all my questions. But when you do get these questions, you need to accept that you might guess a little bit, but eliminate options to make the guessing that you're doing intelligent. If you eliminate down to 2 options and you pick one of the 2, you've given yourself a 50% chance. If you know how to answer 50% of the questions correctly, and you give yourself a 50% of the chance the other times, you are on track to score a fantastic score of about 161, maybe even 162 in the verbal section. So keep that in mind when you approach the verbal section, right? Or keep that in mind when you approach the quant section as well. There's no penalty to guessing, so we want you to guess. The test expects you to guess. The test even expects you to guess. And what you can do is that you can guess intelligently so that you can use guessing to your advantage. Now, I've hit 5 questions, so I'm going to hit the questions at this point. Now, somebody's asked whether CrackVerbal provides admission counseling, and yes, we do. So, towards the end of your preparation for the GRE, you might find that you want to actually, think about what university you have to go to. And that's something I would say you should actually do simultaneously. But if it's definitely something you should think about, and we help with that process. We, help you think about what exactly the university would, sort of do to, sort of set up for you, or what the university demands of you so that you can get those things in your application so that you know how to approach the application the right way. Somebody has asked questions about reading comprehension tips. Now, unfortunately, we're not giving out any specific tips in this session because we have a very structured session that is already pressed for time. So we are simply going to discuss questions that are relevant and pertinent to whatever we have discussed. I see somebody asking how to score 25 in verbal. Even my friends got 25, but coming to me, I don't score 10. Even my friends find, the test hard. Now, what happens is this, right? You have to work on the test on a strategic front and on a tactical front. On a strategic front, you have to make yourself more aware of the right approach to reading. You have to make yourself more aware with what words you're going to need to know. You have to make yourself aware on a very baseline approach how to get better at your knowledge of the concepts. In order to do that effectively, you need to study the concepts effectively. You need to take some time out to either take classes or to watch videos to study and understand how the concepts of the test work, how the test is organized, and what it will toss at you. From there onwards, if you want to get about 25 questions correct out of 40, which is what I'm assuming is your overall challenge. Now, if you're looking to get that correct, what you need to be able to push yourself to do is the stuff that we're discussing now. You always want to eliminate stuff effectively. You want to make sure that your time management is sound so that you have an adequate amount of time to answer each question, so that you don't get bogged down. All right. Now, is it possible to get 280 without any kind of preparation? See, once again, to know what is realistic and what is not realistic is so dependent on what your approach is currently. I would say that it probably is, but we don't know for sure unless you know exactly what kind of a student you are. Right? And this applies for the next question that has come in as well, which says, what is the minimum time required for preparation to score more than 325? I can't say that that is something that is, a question that is a nailed on question for any given person. I've seen people study across 3 to 4 months to get a 325. And I have seen people study, a week or less to get a 325. It is so dependent on where they are as a student, right? And therefore, tips number 1 and 2, which often go overlooked, are very important tips. You need to know where you are. You need to understand where you are by maybe taking a mock test or trying out questions within the stipulated time period to know how to approach it effectively, right? Only then can you know where you stand and how you can set a goal from A to B, right? To get from where you are to where you need to be. All right, so let's move on to the next point. All right, now, a lot of you indicated on the polling, right, that the biggest concern that you have outside of the concepts is vocab, right? Time management came next, and we spoke a little bit about, thinking about time management for the verbal section. But vocab is hands down, the biggest problem that you face. And a lot of people say that vocab is the biggest problem they face. In addition to this, vocab is part of the concepts that you will need to be, be in a sound position to handle the GRE verbal skills, right? To especially handle sentence equivalence and text completion questions, your vocab needs to be very sound. So we are going to talk about a variety of tips. We're going to talk about different tips that will help, a myriad of tips, right? So a variety of tips, a myriad of tips, there's a new word for you, right? A whole range of tips to help you get better at improving your vocab, because this is a fundamental portion of the test that is challenging for so many people. Now, what happens is that, the most common approach is to find a list of words and to try and learn. But instead of doing that, I suggest something a little bit different. If you learn words by learning what their roots are, you will learn words far more effectively. You will learn more words, because if many words have one root, and you know what that one root is, you learned many words at a time. And you understand where those words would be used in context, because you understand how they came to be in the first place. Let's take a look at this in action. You see the word cron over here for time. Now, cron is not a real word, but it is the root for time. Now, root for time, right? It comes from, the origin of the word cron comes from Kronos, Kronos, all right? So Kronos is the Greek god of time. And that's the origin of all words related to time in English. Now, from cron, we know a bunch of words. We know chronological. When things happen in chronological order, they happen in time order. When something is chronic, when a disease is described as a chronic disease, it means it's a disease that has impacted you for a long period of time, that it has been around for a long time. And for something that's a little bit less PG-13, there's a strain of marijuana called the chronic. And the reason it's called the chronic is because the effects of that strain of marijuana last for a long time. So the word chronic is used in a variety of situations related to time. Something is chronic if it is over a long period of time. Now, I see the next word which says chronicle. Now, when you chronicle something, you record something over a period of time. Are you familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia? Right? The Chronicles of Narnia, there is a series of stories told about this magical land called Narnia over a period of time. You might chronicle a series of events. If you tell us about how those series of events transpired, how they progressed, how they happened over a period of time. Now, based on that, what do you think a chronograph might be? So we know chrono is time. What is to graph something? To graph something is to, to note something down, to measure something, to write something, right? To graph something, we measure something when we graph it, right? We make a graph of something if we want to see some measurements about it. And a chronograph is something that measures time. A much simpler word for chronograph is a watch. But there you go, a complicated word for a word that we know, but now it's made a whole lot easier because we understood that chrono was to do with time. And we've seen graph before in the context of measuring, right? So understanding the roots of words helps you not only learn more words, because from one root you learned a bunch, from chronograph, you can make further connections to other things. Something that is written or measured. Lithograph is something that we've learned about stone carvings or stone writings. So litho is to do with stone, right? We have Paleolithic, Neolithic, and graph is to do with writing. So lithographs, chronographs, right? From one word, we went to a different route altogether. We went to lithograph, which had litho and graph within it. And from there, we went to Paleolithic, Neolithic, right? Different words with lithos. And now we know that paleo is to do with old. There's paleo diets, which only eat food that is prepared in a very old style. We have paleo, we have the Paleozoic era, which is the era before dinosaurs existed, even, right? So we have paleo is anything to do with old, neo is to do with new. So just from one word, we went to another word. We made connections, and at no point did you not have a sense of the connections that we made, because you've heard these words before, you've heard of the context of them. Now you have a clear sense of how these words came about. And from them, you can make the connections to learn far more words in the quickest possible manner. And it is for this reason that learning words through their roots is the most effective way to learn new words, hands down, right? So chronograph measures time, a watch. Synchronous, right? Now synchronous, so time, things that are have synchronized swimmers swim, or they do their swimming actions or whatever at the same time, right? Synonyms are words that have the same meaning. So syn is something that we can see as something to do with same, right? So synonym, synchronous, same time. When you sync your music with your phone, right, which was much more of a thing in the past decade than it is today, but fair enough, right? Back when we used to download music onto our computers and sync it to our phones, right, or sync it to our iPods, syncing something meant to bring it up to speed with time. They're both on par time-wise, right? So synchronous. Sync, you're short of synchronize. Anachronous. Now, anachronous is to do with out of time. So anachronous is a negation of time, right? Something is anachronous if it feels out of place for the time. If right now I saw somebody wearing a bowler hat and had a colonial mustache, I would find that to be anachronous because it's not in the right time, right? I would have expected to see that in 1929, not in 2019, right? So anachronous, right? Doesn't make sense within time. We can also see this with certain other words, right? So locu, right, or law is for speak, and it comes from logos, which is also Greek for speech. And you have loquacious for people who speak a lot, colloquial for people for the casual way in which certain language gets carried out, eloquent speech for people who speak well, mono and die, monologue, conversation by one person, dialogue, conversation by two people or more. If, for example, we come out of the movie and say, hey, that person's dialogues were so great, but it was that person's. So that means that person's monologues were great. If we see grandiloquent and magniloquent, both of them, right? Grand to do with big, magnify to do with big. Grandiloquent and magniloquent is to talk big. Soliloquy comes from solo. Solo is the self, right? Soliloquy comes from the self. So talking to oneself. Somniloquy. What is somniloquy now? Who knows? But what's the word for lack of sleep? The word for lack of sleep is insomnia, right? If you can't fall asleep, you have insomnia. And I see somn over here, S-O-M-N. So that's something to do with sleep, and loki, talking, sleep talking, right? Somniloquy is to talk in one's sleep. So if you learn words by making connections with the roots, they will be far more effective than learning words in isolation just in a list. Now, the only time that I would say a list or cards are a little bit more useful, or one of the rare occasions would be, we have a set of flashcards. Now, we saw before, right, that there was this delirium, right, and there were flashcards that I wanted to talk about in a little bit more detail. Let's see how they can work out well, right? So in this case, you have the word chicanery, which means trickery or deception. But how are you going to remember that chicanery means trickery or deception? We now have this lady who is talking to, presumably a shop owner, and she says, this is not coffee, it's all chicory. Now, chicory is something that you would put in coffee to keep it dry, but it also adds something to the weight. So you have less coffee and more chicory. So she's complaining that there's more chicory. Chicory sounds a bit like chicanery. So you have a visual auditory clue. And you also have a context clue, because what this person has done to her now is chicanery. This person has done some trickery to her. This person has not given her what he should have in terms of the right amount of coffee. He's not given her coffee, he's given her all chicory. So what he's done is chicanery, right? Now, these flashcards are very useful at teaching you the words more effectively, but you can only do this effectively if you really sort of interact with them properly. So if you think about, what is the word on this card? What does it mean? What is the context in which I might use it? What is a similar word to it, right? Let's take a look at another one. The word lassitude. Now, lassitude means lethargy or sluggishness, but what does that mean, right? You might have lassitude if you just want to chill out, right? You're not feeling it. The post-lunch lassi attitude. You've had a lunch, you're having a lassi after lunch, right? The carbs and the lassi together settle, and you just feel relaxed. You just want to chill out. You don't really feel like doing any work. Lethargy or sluggishness, right? The post-lunch lassi attitude. And here you have somebody who is in the zone with that, right? They're having a lassi after lunch, right? And chilling out after, and being in a zone where they don't really seem like they're ready for any new work. So situational context of the word lassitude, and post-lunch lassi attitude, right? Something to remember on that front. That sounds a bit like the word lassitude as well. All right, so we have two tips, right? We spoke about two tips regarding how you can improve your vocab, right? Through root words and building connections, right? Building a web of words, and these flashcards, which you can get from us. Now, very often people list words. I find word lists thoroughly ineffective. What happens when you make a word list is that you put words in isolation and you try to learn the words. Probably they're in alphabetical order. How is alphabetical order useful? We'll mix up one word with another word just because they both happen to start with dy, right? Dynasty and dysentery. You can't mix those words up. That doesn't work for you, right? So what you need to do is you need to make sure that if you're going to make a list, right? And I won't say never ever make a list, but if you're going to make a list, the list should achieve what a list really needs to do. The list has to be similar items in said list. Now, what do I mean by similar items in said list, right? It is not effective to just list out words and try to learn them en masse. What you need is that you need to have a unifying trend, right? Either the words should be very similar in meaning, or the intensity should be different, right? So either you have maybe from, like for example, a ravine is thinner than a gorge, but they're both essentially, like they have narrow stream of water below and they're two sides of a cliff, right? but a ravine is narrower than a gorge, and a gorge is narrower than a canyon, and a canyon is narrower than a valley. And those are all essentially that, right? You have two mountainous or up, like high altitude regions surrounded by, like, sorry, in between which you have a low altitude region through which water flows. That works for valley, canyon, gorge, and ravine. But one is wider than the other, is wider than the other, is wider than the other. So you've learned those words. Those are useful to put on a list. Another list would be the example that we've given right here. These words all mean the same thing, but the connotation behind them is slightly different. All of them mean to spend a lot. But to be profligate is to spend a lot, but is to be seen in a negative light. In fact, the word profligate, the origin of the word was the male equivalent for the word slut, right? Probably shouldn't call anyone a slut in real life. That would be incredibly sexist to do, but okay. The word profligate was the male equivalent for the word slut, and the suggestion is that the consideration behind it was that, it was somebody who was seen as not having self-control. Today, that is translated as not having self-control with money, but to be profligate is to really have no self-control with money, and is to be seen in a negative light. To be prodigal is to also be very free and casual with your money and spend a lot of it, and it is seen kind of negatively. It is not as negative as profligate, which is extremely negative, but it is negative nonetheless. If we see something that is extravagant, right? Now, if something is extravagant, that can be negative, it can be neutral, it can be positive. I could describe as something as extravagant spending when it was not necessary. I can describe as something that was extravagant spending that made me happy I was there. And I can just describe something as extravagant spending without any qualitative judgment. So it could really be positive, neutral, negative. It's a very neutral word. Profligate and prodigal were extremely negative and kind of negative. Spendthrift also means to spend a lot, but it's positive. You want to be spendthrift. It's good to be spendthrift when it comes to your family. It's good to be spendthrift when it comes to your significant other. It's good to be spendthrift when it comes to, properly going to see the sights on a vacation, right? Make sure you spend in those places. It's seen as a good thing if you spend a lot there. To be unstinting, the closest definition would be to spare no expense. You've spent all the money. You've gone out of the way to spend as much money as you can, but in a positive light. So, for example, you could be unstinting. The family spent unstintingly for their kids' education, right? They spent a lot of money, but it was seen positively that they spent a lot. All these words mean to spend a lot, but the connotation is different. This is the only circumstance where learning words can actually be effective. All right, I'm going to take some questions now. I see, how many words does somebody need to learn to master the verbal section? There's no fixed number of words. There's no number of words that is enough, and there's no number of words at which I could say, oh, you really don't know any words at all. You need to just keep learning words. It is an organic process, and as you keep introducing yourself to more words, you will get better. I would recommend that over the course of your prep, if you can learn about 1,500 to 2,000 new words, that is very positive, but that is quite challenging. So as many new words as you can learn as possible is always beneficial for you. What topics do we need to stress on quants? For quants, it is more the nature of the question. You have certain questions which are about comparisons of two values, and to think about that requires engaging a different aspect of your brain, and you need to prepare yourself for that effectively in the right way. How to remember words whose root is unavailable, like zenith. Okay, so if you look up a word like zenith, you can still find out what the origin of the word zenith is. In fact, how about we do it right now, right? Zenith etymology. Okay, so the most powerful point of something, right? And it comes from the medieval Latin senet, or Arabic samt, over the head. So the original came from something in astronomy, from where the high point of a star would be where it would be over the head, right? Directly overhead. So the zenith became shorthand for high point, right? That's something new that we've learned. I didn't know that. I think that's good. Thanks for that word, right? We've learned something new about how the word zenith came to be. And now you won't forget the word zenith as easily, because you know that it's high point and it used to be for stars. Now it can be for somebody's rule, right? The zenith of this dynasty was at this point, right? It came from zenith. Maybe you won't learn anything else from zenith. right? Maybe that's not going to teach you something new, but you learn something nonetheless about how to use that word effectively. Just going to see if there are any other questions in the chat. Does CrackVerbal provide a root word learning process? What I would recommend, we don't have a separate specific thing, but what I would recommend is this book called Word Power Made Easy. It really simplifies and gamifies the process. Nothing that I could recommend stronger than a Word Power Made Easy. So somebody did answer sleep talking for somniloquy. Nice, right? Now, the flashcard doesn't have a root system. That is right. Now, see, what is the purpose of using the root system? Okay, so root system is not the only system by which you can learn words, right? In fact, even grouping words like this can be effective. But why do we have the root system anyway? The root system is effective because it allows us to understand words in context. Really, that's why we need to know words, right? So that we can learn them in context, so that we know when they can be used and what are other similar words in similar contexts. Now, the flashcards are effective because they help you get a sense of context. You can go and look up those words for the etymology of them individually if you have the if you're tenacious enough to go ahead and do that. If you have the gumption to go and do that, if you have the hustle to go and do that, good on you. I recommend you do that, right? At this point, I'm going to move ahead because we're already very pushed for time, right? We've run about an hour long already, right? And we will finish it up and then answer any questions at the end. So you can type in questions in the meanwhile if you want, or type them in at the end. Now, lastly, right, a final tip about vocab, right? So we got a lot of tips about vocab because we understand how it is such a central part of how you need to get better at the GRE. Now, at the end of the day, the environment that you're in always contributes to the language that you know and the words that you know, right? If you spend a lot of time around you speaking English, right, or watching English TV shows or watching English movies or just, speaking with your friends in English, right, you'll get accustomed to using more words simply because you will come across a variety of situations where you need to use those words, right? We can think about this being true for the proficiency of literally anything, right? For example, if I were to go and see a movie with my friend, and let's imagine for a second that I don't know anything about movies, right? I really don't understand movies in any way, shape, or form, right? I come out and I didn't like the movie, and I tell my friend, hey, I didn't like the movie. And they ask me, well, why didn't you like the movie? What can I really tell them? If I don't have the right words because I don't know words about movies, all I can really say is it dragged on, it got boring, it was too long. Okay, fine. Those are the words I know and I can use. If I know a little bit more about movies, on the other hand, I can tell my friend the cinematography was really poor. The storyline was not well paced. The theme of the movie did not feel right. That I have more words then to very adequately describe what it is that I need to express about what I didn't like, right? And this is why vocab even matters, right? Because vocab gives you a wider range of what you can express. So in order to get better at vocab, you can create the environment for yourself to get better at it, right? Now, one thing is, of course, to be around people who speak English or speak English with the people around you. But far more effective than that will also be if you take the things that you really like and read more about them. Now, everyone tells you to read the newspaper. Everyone tells you to read things, right? Everyone says, hey, if you read books, if you read newspapers, you'll get better. Now, I don't disagree with that. Of course, if you read newspapers and books, you'll get better. But, the stark reality that we have learned is that many students simply just don't do that. So I will tell you to read newspapers and read books. But if you don't do that, what are you going to do instead, right? What is your approach going to be? What you need to do is take the things that you already like and really, really double down on them. Go deep into them. If you like video games, read articles about video games, right? There is this thing been going on recently about crunch, which is apparently the situation where many video games publishers have to, force their employees to work up to 100 hours a week. And it's causing a negative strain on their approach to making the games, right? There's articles about that. If you really get into video games, you can get into that, right? If you like science, right? If you like physics, you can read about space travel. You can read about the fact that, I don't know, China grew some cotton on the moon and then it died, unfortunately, but they did it for a few days. So there's stuff like that that you can always read, right? And if you go deeper and deeper into any topic, you will come across more words for that topic. And when you come across a word that you don't know, If it's a topic you don't care about, you'll never bother to learn the word. But if you really like that topic, you'll want to know what it means, because, to put this very bluntly, you give a shit about the topic. You care what the topic has to say, right? You want to know what that word means. So you'll actually go ahead and look up that word, right? So, there are many reasons why this is super effective, right? When you do this, it comes with its own context, because you're already reading about content that you like. So you have some context for it. You actually care about what you're looking at. And it is the most effective method of learning, because this is how we naturally, organically learn. This is how people learn at the very basic level. How did you learn English or any language to start with, right? You learned it because you saw other people around you speaking it and you picked it up. So this ends up being the most effective way to learn new words. It is how you learn new words at the stage where you learn words at the greatest rate and at the most effective rate. And it will continue to be that way. There are only two problems. One, it takes a while. It's an organic process, and I would still recommend you start it, but it's not like you can say, hey, I'll do this over 3 months and I'll have gained something, right? It's a process that is a continuous process that you have to work at. The other problem is that, to some extent, right, in some cases, I won't say this is always true, but if you don't seek out enriching content, then it may not help you, because you'll not come across new words, right? At the end of the day, looking at memes on Facebook is easy to do, right? It takes like 5 seconds to look at a meme and laugh. So, how do you account for that, right? You may not be looking at the most enriching content. So I would say find better memes then, right? Or more seriously, find content that might be a little bit more useful for you then, right? So these are a bunch of tips, right? A myriad of tips, a variety of tips, a set of tips across the board about how to tackle building your vocab. Now let's end with one final tip for the day, right? Now this is a little bit about an approach to preparation, right? If you have to do practice questions, how do you do practice? How do you, pace out your practice questions? Now, at the end of the day, analysis matters over bulk, right? You're not trying to solve questions in bulk. What you need to do is this, right? Because at the end of the day, there are a finite, limited number of questions. Everyone who is diligent with their prep will solve all the questions. How are you actually going to get better? You're actually going to get better by analyzing what you did wrong and changing your approach so that you learn what the GRE wants and adapt your brain to give the GRE exactly what it wants, right? So when you understand, when you look at the answer, when you analyze what you got wrong, you're also taking a walk through GRE's brain. The GRE is literally giving you a walk through its brain and saying, hey, this is how we set up the test. This is what constitutes a correct answer. This is what constitutes a wrong answer. So every time you take a question, you learn better. But you can only really get the most of this learning if you make the effort to do so, right? So if you make analysis your prime focus, if you make analysis over question solving your focus, then you can truly get to the point where you benefit from this, right? I would say you don't need to solve more than 20 questions a day. Even 20 questions is probably, the max limit. Like 20 questions is pushing it, but I would say not more than 20, right? Max of 20. But you do need to understand the correct approach for each question. So let's say you solve 20 questions. And as you said, it's difficult to get them right. Let's say you solve 20 questions and you get 5 of them right. You're very early on in your prep and you struggle and you only get 5 of them right. Now, to solve 20 questions, let's say it's, 10 RC and 10 SC, right? 10 RC and 10 SETC. So that should take you 30 minutes, right, to solve the questions. You spend 30 minutes solving the questions. You spend, let's say another 5 minutes totting up the score. So you find out you got 5 out of 20, right? Maybe a bit more than 5. Let's say 10 minutes. So it's taken you 40 minutes so far. Now, for the remainder, right, for the 15 questions that you got wrong, you need to analyze clearly why you got it wrong. You need to spend another 40 minutes or so, right? If we spoke about doing 40 minutes so far, you need to spend another 40 to 50 minutes analyzing what you got wrong, maybe even more than 40. So that works out to being like an hour and a half. And you probably don't need to do it more than an hour and a half, but you do need to do that hour and a half. You do need to do that regular prep. And you do need to put yourself in a place where you can properly analyze why, not only why the correct answer is correct, because you'll read the correct answer and you'll understand why it's correct and you'll say, okay, fine, that works for me, great, the correct answer is correct. But that's not the way to do it, right? Because as we said, the correct answer is not correct because it is correct. The correct answer is correct because the others are wrong. And by understanding why your answer is wrong, and by understanding why the other answers are wrong, you can end up coming to the correct answer overall, right? So that's pretty much all of the tips. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to answer the questions and then we can close up. Now, somebody's asked for how long the GRE score is valid, and it is valid for 5 years. So in fact, I took the GRE in 2015. So my score is still valid, interestingly enough. Best books for solving questions in quant and verbal other than word power and 6 weeks to words of power. So the best books for solving questions in quant and verbal at the end of the day are the books that come from ETS, right? And there's this one that comes from Manhattan Prep called the 5-pound book. So the 5LB, 5 pound, right? So 5-pound book for both verbal and for quant are very effective tools, and they have a decent number of questions. Beyond that, I wouldn't recommend going looking for questions, because the quality of the questions drops. And then you're not training your brain to solve GRE questions. You're training your brain to solve bad clone questions, which doesn't really train your brain effectively, right? So those are books that I would recommend for the GRE. Is there a test held every month in India? There are tests held every weekend. You can choose when you want to take the GRE. You have to go to ets.com and you can choose exactly when to take the GRE and when is the right time to go for it, right? Do I see any more questions? I see one which says, how to score 320 plus in 15 days? See, once again, that's not a useful question if you didn't address tip number 1, right? If your score right now is 290, I don't think you can score a 320 in 15 days. It doesn't work like that, right? You need to take your time and build up your process. So on the other hand, if you're on a 310, how can you push yourself, right? You can use the tips that we have discussed, and you can follow an approach that always structured on elimination to try and push for a 320. I see in quant, what topics to concentrate. As I said right before, always focus on comparisons. I see some more questions that have come in, right? Is 5 pounds sufficient for quants? I would say probably yes, along with the ETS sources as well. Another question is, can I get help, admission help and profile evaluations from your side? So I'll say from CrackVerbal side, yes. I am not the best person for profile evaluations. I am more focused on teaching students. So that is my best suit, my strongest suit. So, but you will get help from CrackVerbal. You'll get help from people far more qualified and effective than I am. What makes CrackVerbal different from other institutes? What I would say from what I've noticed is that we're smaller, but our approach to academics is sounder. I think that, what we do is our approach to the test always is centered, just like with, the content for this webinar, our approach to the test is centered around how to understand the mechanics of the test rather than just brute force our way through. So I would say that's our biggest difference. Is there a demo test that I can give to analyze? I think that's a good question. That's a very good question. So, everyone can take note of that. If you have to take a demo test, you can take one from the ETS website. They offer you a couple of diagnostic tests. You can also buy practice tests from them, which I thoroughly recommend doing. Another source that you can get is that you can sign up for practice tests with us, and we give you access to 5 different practice tests. So these are potential options for taking demo tests. And we thoroughly recommend you take a demo because that helps you understand where you currently are. Now, I'm not going to address profile questions because that is not specifically the content of this webinar. We've already run well over time. How to improve RC, what materials to cover. As always, remember to work on concepts and questions, right? 2 approaches, concepts, questions. So if you need to improve in a particular section, you need to revise the concepts to make sure you understand them. When it comes to material, always practice official questions or questions from the 5-pound book, right? If you're worried about how to concentrate, the one thing that I personally do is I take a deep breath before the start of a passage and then put my focus. The other thing is this, you don't need to know 100% of the material of the passage. You just need to know enough to answer the questions. So don't worry too much, right? If you're less pressured, you can answer the questions better. All right. I'm going to turn off the Q&A section now. I'm going to see if any other questions have come in from elsewhere. Okay, so the GRE, somebody's asked about the GRE words. Come many times. Okay. The GRE words, which have been provided in many questions, right? Like, so the different words that have come up over time. See, the thing is this, the GRE, the way it produces its results is by a scaled score. What this means is that they need to create a clear gap between the people who scored well and poorly, and they try to make the vocabulary as not gameable as possible, so that you can't just learn a set of, like, say 600 words and you're done altogether, right? It can't be as simple as that. So what happens is that, those words are not ineffective completely because they are challenging words inherently, and that of course, gives them an upper hand. But what you do need to be able to do is you need to think about answering words from different sources as much as possible, because they themselves will constantly want to toss you different sources. As always, you can ask questions on the on the Q&A section, right? If you answer the questions in the Q&A section. Is it advisable to make mistakes in the first section so that one gets an easier section in the next? Please don't do that. No, you need to get as many questions correct. If you get hard questions wrong, it is not as much of a problem. If you get hard questions wrong, the impact to your score is less than if you get easy questions wrong. Please do every question correctly if you can. Never make that happen, right? Some people are asking about recordings of this session. You can get them off of YouTube. The session will get uploaded on YouTube, so don't worry about that, right? Somebody's asking about different way of asking questions. Well, you are on the Q&A. You can ask questions here and now in a different time, in a different manner. So if you sign up for our course, you definitely can get access to us, right? So what you would have to do is you'd have to, get in touch with us, at CrackVerbal/GRE, and you will be able to, set up yourself for a course. All right. I don't see any new questions that have come in, so I'm going to call it at this point, right? We have run significantly over time, but thank you all for all of you who stayed all the way till the end, right? I appreciate the time that you took out on a Tuesday evening, right? You could have been doing other things. So good on you that you put in that effort. And I hope that these were useful tips for you to think about the baseline approach that you take. Because at the end of the day, if you don't put the right ingredients in, no matter how much effort you put in with the cooking, you won't get the kind of food that you want. So this hopefully gives you a little bit of food for thought about the ingredients that you want to put in. Right? So puns aside, hope you all have a wonderful night and take care. And I will see you all around at some point in time. Take care. See ya.